talking about this topic. This talk can go on for hours and hours and hours. One quick statement. The third term education committee at SACAP made a statement, and it's available there on the 2012, I think, or 2011 annual report, that transformation via RPL has been achieved, and they therefore removed it. There were, I think, between 5 and 10 in total people that actually got RPL. 56 million people in the country, 5 people got through, and transformation has been achieved. And out of that few people, there were only, I think, 1 or 2, I don't know, just correct me guys if I'm wrong, 1 or 2 people that were actually of color, or there were no people of color, I don't know. Okay, 1 was colored and 1 was Indian. How is that transformation achieved? That's the critical question. So, having made those statements and listened to Dinesh and Dr. Yashen, anyone questions? What's on your mind? Statements? Simply, no one wants to put their hand up. Too yellow.
My name is Gert. I just wanted to, quite agree with what Lakin was also saying. There's a lot of people out there who do not have the qualification to be an architect, but they have the skills and the talents to be there. And I think this RPL is a great movement for those people who can get to where they need to be.
Thank you for that. 24 years into the democracy, and much more than that into discussions of RPL, it hasn't been implemented. Before I think you might want to... Okay. So I think the question is, and I've got some notes here regarding that, is the formal route, the formal education route in architecture is only about 100 to 150 years, or maybe younger. I think you know the facts in your head. Before that, you went and found an architect and you begged him to be a mentee under him and to work for him, and that's how you became an architect. Suddenly, for the last 100 years, maybe less, my parents have to be rich, send me to university, and I come out, but I'm graduated, but I'm still not a professional. And that is so restricted. So I think you want to take that further, Dinesh? Dr. Lakin?
Is SACAP going to acknowledge mentorship from the professionals towards the students? So students coming to work with us, will they form part of their curriculum more than it is at the moment? Because I'm hearing conflicting stories. If they spend 2 years or 4 years working for a professional, is that acted as part of their education?
Okay, now it gets technical. This year is an RPL rubric that I hold the intellectual copyright, intellectual property rights to. And I'm going to share this with SACAP and the universities. You see, you can't just work in practice, and this is something I want to stress. You can't just work in practice and then expect to be registered as an architect just because you work for X number of years. What has to happen is RPL is a process of alignment, okay, to make sure that the learning outcomes at the requisite NQF, National Qualifications Framework levels, is achieved. So what's the NQF about is that if you want to be an architect, you have to demonstrate that you have equal competence in those 10 areas of competence that SACAP identifies in the IDOW, all right? But they're nevertheless 10 competency levels, all right? If you're going to be an architect, if you match that to qualifications, national qualification standards set by SAQA, it means that I, as an academic now, remember I'm a practicing architect now and an academic, right? So, if I had to assess your learning in practice, I must look at this rubric and say, are you achieving the outcomes as per SAQA exit level descriptors through your practice? And there are very, very few people that I know right now that will achieve 95% of all the required exit levels. Let me clarify that now. So this whole notion of backdoor approach, lowering standards, is just because of ignorance. Or, on the other hand, those people that are waiting and saying, now that RPL is in, I'm going to be an architect because I can do X, Y, and Z. It's not so. I think there's an equal responsibility from the universities to understand the context and learning in the workplace, as it is for those practitioners in the workplace to understand what formal learning is about and what are the expected outcomes. All right. So, one of the big challenges in the profession and in academia is that, I spoke about it, it's self-referential understanding of reality and truth. So it means I only understand and make truths out of my context from my own experience, or and looking through my own lenses, which is natural. It's about time that people start to look at and understand RPL for what it is. Now I'm going to refer you to a publication that SAQA, when I was at the launch last week, the book launch. There's a book called RPL as Specialized Pedagogy that SAQA released. If you go to the HSRC website, you can download that free. Go and do it, please. If you don't do that, then you're going to be sitting here 10 years later fighting for something you don't know what you're fighting about. Alright? It's very important to understand. Because the challenge is also from a young graduate. Why did I have to study? Not me. A young graduate's going to ask, the alternate question is, I had to study for X number of years. I come from yes, I have opportunity now, which I didn't, my parents didn't have, but they had to struggle. I had to work nights and things to study for 5 and 6 years and 8 years to get a board, write a board exam. Am I not disadvantaged now? And that's not, the point is, the alternative argument is, I never had opportunity to study. My parents couldn't afford because of socio-economic circumstances. So that's where, so RPL serves both, because I want to speak to the young students. I see many of my past students here, the National Diploma, BTech, some BAS as well. And I was glad, I've seen them after from 2008 to 2009 for the first time, so I feel at home. And these students I know are capable, but they never progressed beyond that BTech because there was no other means to progress without giving up your job and studying full-time, or no mechanism for RPL to allow that articulation. You're sitting here today in the same position you were in 2008, and I can point them out, right? They're here. I've seen Buthelezi from the last time I saw him was in 2008, where I was giving them troubles, and a few others here, students. So it's about alternative routes to achieve the same learning outcomes, but those learning outcomes have to be measured. So SACAP is saying, yes, RPL is going to be achieved, but there's this rubric here that's going to be implemented that says, if you want to move from a technologist to an architect, can you prove that you have met all the learning outcomes at NQF level 9, and how do you assess that? There's a rubric. Okay? That's been done. Now this is my own academic work that I'm giving SACAP the right to use. So I'm speaking at two levels here. One is SACAP, but if you want to know how is SACAP going to use it backdoor, and you hear some very prominent architects talking about this, it's an inferior system, and the questions I get asked sometimes are shocking, because don't let your ignorance project onto others as truth. Okay? So, I think in the architectural profession, the first bit of advice is always engage in lifelong learning. Find out the fact and don't work with perception. Youngsters are active on social media, and so are old people, I found out recently, through all the challenges that came my way. Okay, you know what I'm talking about. But fact and perception, you need to separate those two. And I'll advise Cyber as well, go and look at that HSSRC publication, download it, read it backwards to forward. And everybody sitting here, because that's going to give you a sense of what the reality is and what the truth is. Because you have to. The only way RPL is going to work is you can demonstrate that you've learned equally, you know, through practice as. Okay. And then there's a funny, I know Professor Roger Fisher is on our RPL committee that I chair, and there's practicing architects and technologists there as well. And what he said is that some of the professionals and people that are teaching won't actually pass this. That's how rigorous this RPL rubric is. You are a pilot tester, you've seen the new one. It is not easy. And I can give it to architecture, professional architects and academics. Test is going to be, it'll be nerve-wracking for them as well, okay? I wouldn't personally want to go through this this test again. Yeah, do it, but it will be nerve-wracking. So it's rigorous, and I want you to understand that. It's about facts rather than perceptions, right? But very soon you will be getting this, the new, in fact I'm going up tomorrow to meet the IT guys to test this thing in the back-end system, and you're going to see a very different RPL rubric out. It's going to be stressful and scary, but so is formal education, you know? And that's a fact, right?
Thank you, Yushen. I'll give you a chance now. Anyone else? Also, make notes on, give your chances now. The one thing I do need to state, stemming from what Yushen just said, and I was witness to this, I actually asked a question. There was a meeting held at SACAP, and the ALSs and Department of Education, and we're having all this opposition to RPL. And the critical question there, and this answer is totally related. What does the university produce? Does the university produce a professional? And this was, well, in my terms, or in my words, it's not an exact quote, but the guys from the ALS said, no, we do not produce professionals, we produce graduates. Okay? So how does a graduate become a professional? You do 2 years of in-service training, and you write a PPE exam, and you can then become registered as an architectural professional. Right? So the critical question is the PPE exam an exam that determines, is it sufficient, 2 years plus an exam, is it sufficient to actually prove your competence, your professionalism? And that's a critical question. Because it then turns around or related to that is your IDOW. So 2 years of mentorship, I wrote the exam, I can go and design a stadium, a nuclear plant, a hospital with that 2 years of mentorship or in-service training. I'm not saying he's incompetent, I'm saying, is it sufficient? I'm just asking the critical question. Versus someone who was previously disadvantaged, couldn't study, got mentored for 30 years, understand the topic pretty well. Yes, they might be lacking in 1 or 2 subjects, but stuck in that position. So that was the statement I made. Something for you all to think about and maybe ask further questions. But Michael, you had...
Is SACAP pressurizing the ALSs, particularly universities, to release and share that the information that is very closed in producing architects? What I mean by that is there's a whole knowledge base of information and knowledge that is associated with university training. Is that going to be available online at a reasonable cost as part of this RPL program?
Let me recontextualize the question, right? You talk about gaps in training, all right? So you, through the RPL process, obviously the first part is an assessment, the first rubric, and it's invariably going to highlight learning gaps, theory, urban design, whatever, right? So you want to know what courses are going to be available at the universities on a part-time basis. SACAP's already in that. I mean, Videsh was just referring to a question that I asked in Bloemfontein. I was standing in front, right? And I asked, it was all these VAs were sitting on one side and practitioners, and you were there as well, Michael. And the academics. It was during the heads of schools. No, it was an architectural education lehotla we had in Bloem. It's a question that I asked the universities that, can you produce an architect? That was the question, in 5 years. And the answer was no, all right? The alternative is the value of experience. Now, what you're getting to is at the same place and around the same time, we asked all the learning sites, we gave them the opportunity, because their Department of Higher Education and Training recognized, to start packaging RPL courses. And I'm not going to use the word pressure, but there's that incentive out there. I know KZN is going to be looking at it, and DUT as well here. But that's going to have to be based on this rubric, right? So ideally, the voluntary associations and any architectural learning sites, whether public or private, will have the opportunity of developing RPL specialized modules. And I suspect they're going to be around theory, history, context and urbanism, and those areas there. And quite a lot as well, believe it or not, around professional practice and documentation. Because when we look at, from the SACAP investigating committee side, you'll be amazed at the mistakes in that area. So we're saying that now is the time to actually start putting things together, because what the activists should be fighting as well is, I'll suggest stop fighting the university, say, why haven't you? Now that RPL is going to be out, what can you offer us as RPL modules? And the pressure is not, it's going to come from SACAP in terms of the validation protocols, the guidelines are being rewritten. But the pressure now, it's a different conversation. There's SACWA, the articulation policy is out. The National Education Plan was out in January 2017, all right? The RPL implementation strategy is out. SACAP is implementing it. Now the questions are different. Universities, VAs, what are you offering for me to bridge my skills gaps? At UKZN, I'm involved in developing the part-time master's degree for those people that cannot afford to go full-time to university, all right? And there's different ways. But now is the time to start doing it. Engineering is way ahead of us in RPL. They've always been ahead. Medicine in specialized courses as well, not in some.